Hello, folks. Happy Thursday. Got some uh, interesting info, interesting news happening in the league. We'd start with something usually off the hockey page for the pre-show. And I've got something, and Russ has got something when it comes to the teams that we follow, and it's not necessarily in this sport, but it crosses the gamut of all sports for the teams that we're fans of. When they do something that annoys us, or that we know is wrong, or that we think is stupid, it is the most annoying thing out there. And I'll let you take the stage here, Russ, with your complaint about the Jets, because I have something about the Yankees.
Well, I'll go one step further. It's my job to sort of write about it too, and it makes it painful. Like when I did a book on the New York Mets, the joyful parts were very joyful, and the painful parts were really hard to write. But you have to do it. So the New York Jets, like a lot of people have said, hey, why don't you do a Jets book? I don't know. I might not live through that. I mean, that's really the reality. But yesterday when all this was breaking, every team was hiring a coach, and we had gotten down to the point with the Jets where it was either Mike McCarthy, Matt Rule, who was a coach of Temple and Baylor, or Adam Gase, whose name never went away. And at first I thought, well, there's no way they cannot go with McCarthy, right? But then I saw that Matt Rule was getting a second interview, and I was like, uh-oh. So then I put up a post on social media, and we all were chatting about it. And it wasn't like I was against Matt Rule, but the problem is he has a very small NFL resume, just 1 year as an offensive line coach for the Giants, and then that was it, right? So now the Jets hire Adam Gase over Mike McCarthy, who's clearly more qualified in the sense that he's got more credentials now, and he's got a way better record. I mean, his record, people can go read my article at sportsology.com. McCarthy's record is not all because of Aaron Rodgers. You know, if people ever watched the Packers, they would realize they never had a running game. Like that was a team that had to survive just on Aaron Rodgers because they never could produce a running back.
Or at times didn't have a defense. I mean, it was only like, when Matthews came around and they invested some money in their defense that they actually, they had to have that offense on the field most of the time to win the game.
Now, the thing that really got me was, look, I watch plenty of Miami Dolphins games. I'm a Jet fan, right? I went to opening day against the Dolphins. The only reason the Jets lost that game is because they forgot Ryan Tannehill could scramble. And that was why they won that game. It wasn't because of any great plays that Adam Gase called. There were a couple of run plays that he called, the run pass, the run pass option plays. There were a couple of those, but a lot of them were off broken plays. End of the day, he's another Rex Ryan type where he talks a good game. But the problem is, and I wrote about this yesterday, and it's one of those situations where I actually was 100% on the money. Peyton Manning called the Jets and put in a good word. And I have to tell you, the Denver Broncos won the Super Bowl because of their defense. They didn't win it because of Peyton Manning, and they didn't win it with Adam Gase there. Gase was gone. So I don't understand why a phone call from Peyton Manning would have this much impact, but I'm not happy. Anyhow, we welcome in Kevin Allen, right?
Yeah, Kevin, what we're discussing here is the teams that we follow as fans when they do things that annoy us. And obviously what Russ was just talking about was Adam Gase being hired as the head coach instead of Mike McCarthy, or, going back in the day, the hiring, and then in my instance, the manipulation of John Ferguson Jr. when he was general manager of the Maple Leafs. My current annoyance is the situation with the Yankees and Manny Machado. They spent all this time getting underneath the $197 million mark for the luxury tax to reset it for what was rumored to be all last year, the specific purpose of buying in on Machado or Bryce Harper, more likely Machado because they really need him on the infield. And now it's coming out that the White Sox are willing to go at least 8, maybe 10 years. So are the Phillies. The Yankees are sort of pulling their punches, want conditions in the deal and haven't even made an offer. And I'm like, okay, you're going into the season next year without Didi Gregorius as your starting shortstop, and with Troy Tulowitzki, who's been broken down the last couple of years. I mean, and it doesn't look like they're getting anywhere close to the $197 million. So the second generation of Steinbrenners are definitely not like their father in terms of spending willy-nilly to bring a winner to New York?
Yeah, I've got my own pet peeves, in Detroit, having been a Lions fan for 59 years and one playoff victory in that period of time. It's so disheartening for Lions fans because they've changed coaches so many times through the years, and every coach comes in and says, well, the last guy did a terrible job and I'm starting over. So, like Jim Caldwell, people were so disappointed in him. I actually thought he was an okay coach.
Right.
And the players liked him. He was a player's coach. And they had a decent team, not a good team, not a contending team, but it was a decent team. And they bring in the guy who's supposed to turn it around in Matt Patricia. And, they go backwards. And, I'm sure the way he, his view of it was, well, I got here and there was nothing here. I had to kind of start over. But, it's so frustrating because if this Patricia experiment doesn't work and in 2 years he's gone, the next guy's going to come in and say, well, I'm starting from zero, and it's just a continuing saga of, one season after another. Like so many people talk about, the streaks and how long without a championship. But I got to believe that the futility of the Lions ranks with them all. I mean, the fact they've never even had a sniff at the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
I mean, Kevin, for me, I at least was alive, got to see Joe Namath win a Super Bowl, even though I was a little kid. I was 5 years old, but I was aware of it. Like Bobby Lane, I don't know if any of us saw Bobby Lane play.
No, I didn't. And I'm 63 years old. So
am I wrong? Am I wrong, Kevin? The closest they've gotten is the NFC Championship game. I think 90-91
they won one playoff game. They beat the Dallas, Cowboys. That 1 year. And what's really remarkable is that when Wayne Fontes was the coach, he was always people would kind of laugh about him that he was kind of the he was kind of an old school coach. But right now, if you look at the teams through the years of the last 60 years, he might be the best coach they ever had. Like in terms of, he had really good teams. Now he had Barry Sanders, but he had teams that were exciting and looked like they were going to make some noise. They didn't, but he had in the era where they had Herman Moore and they put up a lot of offense, and it was kind of exciting. But man, it's just so disheartening when you're a Lions fan. So I relate to that's my one team that when you become a sports writer, you sort of lose the boyish enthusiasm for rooting for a team. I love sports, but I don't live and die with losses. It's just because it's just the nature of my work. I just don't do it. But the one team I still have left, is the Lions. I'd like to see them do well.
I've started to feel that. The thing is, it's like everybody knows I've been a Leaf fan my entire life. It's like, you can't be a fan and cover the team. So I've had to put that aside. But when it comes to the Yankees, when it comes to the Bills, when it comes to, I've really done, my NBA team is the Celtics. I still get into it, but yeah, as you get older, it's like you're not throwing things against the wall.
I've never been like that. I love to watch the game.
You should have been a Buffalo Braves fan, Mike, but you're just not old enough.
Yeah.
I remember them. I just,
Well, then why didn't you like them? They had McAdoo. Come on.
They moved. They're the San Diego Clippers. Come on. They left Buffalo. They spurned us. So screw John Wayne Brown.
I think we need to talk about Sergey Bobrovsky.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Let's start the show and we'll talk about it.
Yeah. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Thursday, January 10th, 2019.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
Kevin Allen, USA Today Sports.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. As Kevin did say, the first thing up is Sergey Bobrovsky. A little bit of a surprising announcement this morning. The Blue Jackets released a statement regarding Bobrovsky that he was not going to travel with the team to, I guess they're playing Nashville, and I'm sure it's tonight or tomorrow night, but the statement released, there are certain expectations and values that we have established for our players that define our culture, said Jarmo Kekalainen. An incident occurred in which Sergey failed to meet those expectations and values, so he made the decision that he would not be with the team for tonight's game. This is an internal matter, and we will have no further comment at this time. And when John Tortorella was asked about it this morning, he did not comment any further. Kevin, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I have no idea what happened, but I will say this is very odd. I mean, it was written in a cryptic fashion.
Yeah.
And he didn't say suspension, but that's clearly what it is.
Right.
It's just not formal.
Yeah, it's not a formal suspension, so I'm assuming he's getting paid and so forth. But it makes us wonder: is this all wrapped around what's been going on all season with Bobrovsky and the team, which is that he's going to be an unrestricted free agent on July 1st. They wanted to re-sign him. They're not getting anywhere. There's debate within the hockey world about whether they should trade him or not. They're dealing with another player, Artemi Panarin, who's in the same situation. And all of this, I don't think you can look at this in a vacuum. I mean, I think all of this is interrelated. I don't think this has anything to do with the contract negotiation. Clearly, there was an incident. But I think you can't look at it without saying, well, he's not going to be with the team anyway. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like he's going to be gone. And so I guess now, to me, the question is, does this mean, we're going to see a trade? That they've made the decision, they're going to move on. And this is a very difficult situation for the Blue Jackets. They have a team that's in the playoff mix. They can at least in the back of their mind saying, hey, what if we get on a run in the postseason? And yet they have two very, very important players on their team who, if they play out the season, they won't get a return for. And, the question is what should they do? And, I was on a radio station recently and they asked me, well, some people believe that it will set the team back for a couple or three seasons if they just get nothing out of Panarin. And my argument for that is, did it set the New York Islanders back 2 or 3 seasons to lose John Tavares? Because I think John Tavares is better than Panarin.
But I have to say, to that comparison, I don't think, even though I love Pierre-Luc Dubois and think he's a really good player, I don't think that there's an offensive guy to replace Panarin in Columbus like Barzal is with the Islanders. I mean, he's sort of taken the central role there, and he's going to be, I think, the guy that they build around. And I mean, I think Pierre-Luc Dubois is a very good two-way guy, but I don't know whether he can provide that offense.
Yeah, but I mean, I see your point on that, and I think
it's not expected to. Honestly, they're not.
Right, it's not. And the one thing we all learn, going back to our days of playing high school sports, is it always seems like when one class leaves, oh my gosh, there's just no way that this next group coming along is going to be this good. And then lo and behold, everybody raises their level a little bit. So my point in all that is not it's never a good thing if a team loses players like Bobrovsky and Panarin. But I don't think it carries the consequences as we all want to make it believe. I don't think it causes an earthquake that's going to set the team back forever and a day. My thought on it is, and I said this early in the season, but for Korpisalo did not play as well as we had hoped. I mean, the problem they now have is that while Bobrovsky has not been in his best season, he's actually has much better numbers than Korpisalo. So, but what I said early, and I probably still believe this, I felt they should trade Bobrovsky, try to get another veteran goalie, and ride out Panarin. That's what I would do, because I think it's still important in Columbus. I think they've regressed. When you think about the excitement of in Columbus about that franchise when I got there, and then all these years of struggling to make the playoffs, still haven't crossed over into the threshold yet of being a consistent playoff thing. I think they need to get in the playoffs for their fan base.
They do. I'll tell you what I blame it on. I blame it on John Tortorella needing that pullover that he puts under his sport coat now on the bench, because all of a sudden, this far into his career, he decided he got chilly when he was on the bench. And I think that's changed everything. No, just kidding. Look, this is a team that's loaded with prospects. So I don't think it would be a death blow but they're going to have to get assets for one of them. And now it does seem like it should lean towards Bob. We don't know what the situation is. It could have been just something as fleeting as him disagreeing with the coach and the coach saying, well, then, you're not on the trip. Who knows? But at the end of the day, if Korpisalo does well on this trip, then we're all going to believe that Bob could be the one that gets traded. And if that's the case, they'll get a haul for him. It doesn't look like they're re-signing him because they have been negotiating with him, and he gave them what the number is, and we've never heard that number's come up. So I don't think that number is going to be met. So for next year, are we looking at Bob going to another team or the KHL? Who knows? So a team is going to take him on a rental basis, and as a rental, he'll still be worth a lot because there's a few teams out there that could use somebody like that. Calgary being one of them.
Well, it's interesting, and Doug McLean, is a former president and GM of the Blue Jackets. He was commenting on the situation right now, and he didn't have any inside info, but his analysis was that they would keep both of them and then try to negotiate with one of them during the summer before July 1st. I think that's pretty risky, and his reasoning behind that is because they've never won a playoff series, and the fan base is desperate for them to at least win a first round series. But I mean, you have to think of the best case scenario in terms of going forward. Is winning a round worth losing the assets that you could potentially get for a Panarin or a Bobrovsky? In my mind, it's no. I mean, I know you want to win a round, but
depends what the finances are, Mike. That's
I don't even know that you can make a statement like that, Mike.
Right.
Like
the finances are huge
without walking in their shoes. Like,
right. True.
I mean, that's a. I mean, I really, I'm with Russ on this. I think it is very important for this franchise to show success. Like, it was hard to get a ticket in Columbus when they first, put that franchise there, and that's not the case anymore. And
right.
They really have regressed, and they're still, still trying to escape expansion mode. Like, right. I think you can say that simply because they haven't won a playoff round. They've only made the playoffs. What is it, a couple or three times? They
lost to Detroit once,
Pittsburgh
twice.
Yeah, twice, so three times. So whatever it is, I mean, it just isn't, and it's important for them to make the round. So I think it is worth that. And I just think again, I think because Bobrovsky hasn't been at his best anyway, I think they can get credible goaltending. I think they may have to go out and get someone, but I think you could get a lot for Bobrovsky. So I wouldn't have a problem with them trying to get some assets for him. But I think you ride out. Like, I think it would be devastating for the offense to lose Panarin.
Right. No, there's no question about that.
Yeah. So I think you just keep Panarin and you ride him out, and hope for the best. And I don't think there's any hope of re-signing him. I think he's gotten to this point. And I think he's going to test free agency. But I think you just run that deal. And even though I agree with Mike's assessment that they don't have anyone like Barzal to take Panarin's place, I do think that the devastation of losing Panarin isn't as great as people think it's going to be. I mean, they were looking for that dynamic presence before he got there, and they were still kind of contending for a playoff spot. I don't think they'll be, too far behind where they are now.
Yeah, I mean, right now their position is tenuous, and this may affect things because right now they're in third place in the Metro with 51 points. The Islanders are at 50, and they're in ninth place. So right now, that means they're 1 point out of falling out of the top 8. Now, the other teams in the wild cards are both Atlantic Division teams. So the Islanders are right now, and maybe an outside chance the Carolina Hurricanes are the only teams that Columbus has to worry about getting into the playoffs. But it's a question of they're going to face Pittsburgh or they're going to face Washington in the first round if they finish in third place in that division. And both those teams have beaten them in the playoffs. And Bobrovsky right now, 18-13-1, 2.87 GAA, 906 save percentage. Those numbers are all low compared to his career total.
I'm telling you though, regardless of what people are saying in the chat room, if I'm Calgary, I'm calling Yarmo and I'm trying to get him because I don't know if Rich is going to hold up the whole year. And they've got a team that could get to the Stanley Cup they might be able to catch lightning in a bottle by getting Bob. It could be like a Hobby Bullen situation where he really got Tampa to the cup, even though Tampa did have the best line in hockey, but they still needed Hobby Bullen to be Hobby Bullen. This is maybe a one chance for Calgary to get there, and I would do it. I would give up a prospect like Jankowski and some picks, and I would try it.
Well, Kevin, the one, we were talking about this because we're doing some talk about buyers and sellers, and we'll continue to do that today. But Calgary was the one team we were looking at them, and it was goaltending that we thought that they may have to address, because Rittich has played well, but I don't know how long that's going to last. And if it isn't Bobrovsky, it was a guy like Jimmy Howard. But how
try to re-sign Jimmy Howard,
right?
Who's actually played pretty well over the last 2 or 3 seasons, and because they don't have any young player, and he's a good company guy. Everybody likes him. He's a popular guy. So I think their thought is, why do it unless we can get a first round pick?
Right. Now, if they get Russ, if they get a guy like a Sam Bennett, who was a former first round pick, but it hasn't really turned out in Calgary. From my point of view, I don't think the book has been written on Sam Bennett yet. I think he needs another opportunity somewhere. And we're talking about Howard, who's a rental, and maybe Kevin is right. Maybe they turn around and do a Keith Tkachuk and re-sign him after they trade him someplace.
Well, I will say this: the chat room did a good point. They're going to have to lose some salary, so Mike Smith probably goes back in the trade, right?
Right.
That's the way I think they balance that off. But I'm telling you, I wouldn't want Sam Bennett. I would want Jankowski, because Jankowski's got a reduced role on that team, but he had 17 goals last year, only 7 this year. Sam Bennett's never getting 17 goals again in the NHL, but Jankowski can with more ice time. And I think you put him on Columbus, he will get more ice time.
We welcome Peter Tessier to the show. Kevin, I want to start with this because I saw the Predators play against the Leafs earlier this week, was very impressed. Now, they've had a lot of injury problems. They got Forsberg back. Subban was out for a while. Now everybody's back, I believe. Arvidsson's back as well. And they've looked they looked like a well-oiled machine against the Leafs, and they beat Chicago 4-3 in overtime yesterday. I think the only thing missing from that team, and again, we're approaching February 25th in the trade deadline, and we're going to be looking at what some of these buying teams need. I think the only thing preventing Nashville from going to the Cup final is maybe a little more offense. And if there is a scoring winger at the deadline that is available, I think that's their target. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. They're always looking to add some toughness as well. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about Wayne Simmons might be a good fit there. A guy that can produce some goals, but also add some toughness and grit. I've talked about this before, but always the impression of David Poile is he's very conservative, but he's actually one of the top 3 most aggressive general managers in the game, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So I would assume he'll stick his nose. And you're absolutely right. I mean, they have the number 1 defense in the league, in my opinion, in terms of the personnel on defense. I don't think it's close. And I like San Jose's as well, but I just think they have all the elements in Nashville. They have guys that can play defense, and they have guys that can move the puck. And we always, at least for the last 3 years, I would say, we're always trying to discount Pekka Rinne. We're always thinking, well, is this the year? Is this the year he's going to just lose it? And you know what? It hasn't been the year that he's lost it. And so they got the goaltending and they have the defense, and their scoring is adequate. Forsberg is a much better scorer than people realize. Mm-hmm. But I think as you said, I think they could use a little bit more. And they have a guy who knows how to make trades, and that is an art. We all know that, and somehow Poile can make it happen.
Speaking of which, Kevin, there was on the radio today as I was coming home. There's talk on TSN 1290, and I didn't catch the beginning of it, but they were talking about the idea of Nashville going all in and getting Matt Duchene, which would be frightening down the middle when you think about adding that into the mix.
And he can play the wing too.
He can play the wing too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that they've been underwhelmed by Kyle Turris. I think they hoped that he was going to be better than he's been. I mean, I don't think he's been a disaster by any stretch, but his production, last year and in the playoffs wasn't quite as strong as they wanted it to be. So I wouldn't be shocked if they look at that. It's the kind of trade that David Poile makes, and it just gives you more. Bonino can play the wing, he can play center, and you get a guy like Duchesne who can do exactly the same way. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, Poile likes big-time players. I mean, this is a guy that, brought in Paul Kariya, traded for Peter Forsberg. He's always been in the middle of absolutely everything. So that makes sense.
I think Duchesne's staying there, though, Kevin. I think he's signing a long-term deal because the other guys are all leaving. I think if Nashville wanted to do something crazy, go try and get Mark Stone, because you'd have to give up assets, but that might get you a Stanley Cup.
The problem is that
they might do that. Yeah.
The problem is that a week ago, the talk out of Ottawa, because I was talking to somebody who covers the team, that it was likely that Stone was going to stay and Duchesne was going to leave, and now it's vice versa. It keeps going back and forth. I mean, right now, Kev, right? I think that Pierre Dorian is in the most difficult position of any general manager in this league, because he's got he has no control over. They don't have a first-round pick, so there's not going to be a benefit for them finishing outside of the playoffs. They're near the bottom of the league, and he's got three, not just Duchesne, not just Stone, but Dzingel, also a UFA, and these are all valuable players. And I'm not sure about the ownership in terms of how much money they're willing to spend, but these are guys that you have to make a decision on before February 25th, or you're going to lose out.
Yeah, it's sad too, because they got two of the better young players in Brady Tkachuk and Shabbat. I mean, those are two, but they got so much bad, they've got bad karma with their owner, bad karma with their arena. There's just a lot of bad karma in Ottawa.
A little inside information here is Mark Stone's dad used to be a client of mine. And when they went, Russ, I do this just for you.
6 degrees of Peter Tessier.
Yeah, he's a super interesting guy, actually. Yeah, really neat. So when Mark and the Senators are going through their RFA negotiations, he was in the office one day, and I said, and this is on the news a lot. And I asked him, I said, well, how are things going with Mark? I said, what's going on? He just shakes his head and he goes, hell is living through an NHL contract negotiation. He goes, it's just awful. He's a really descriptive, gregarious guy. Like, he sort of likes to, he's got a big sort of booming thing, but he basically said, this isn't fun. And I'm wondering if there's some lingering stuff there from that round that might say, given where the Senators are now, that says, yeah, we don't need to do this dance with you again. And I'm just throwing that out there. Full disclosure, some of the, Kevin, you would know this well, Russ, you too. Sometimes those things linger on, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Sure. I feel fairly safe in saying the Maple Leafs are very glad that they don't have to negotiate a Nylander deal in the next 5 years. That I'm sure that what they went through with Louis Gross and Michael Nylander, they don't want to face ever again. That's why I continue to say, and it's only my personal belief, that William Nylander will not finish out that contract. In fact, I think he's going to get traded next summer, but that's just my personal belief. So looking at some of the other contenders and Tampa Bay, I mean, Kevin, there's not much wrong with this team, but I still think if Steve Yzerman was there, I'd guarantee it that they're going to make some sort of move before the deadline. I feel fairly confident that Julian Breezeball will do the same thing, because they're on the precipice of winning a Stanley Cup. Maybe if they add that one more piece, and to my mind, and looking at their team, it's a defenseman. If they can get themselves a veteran defenseman and improve the depth of their blue line, that might be the last piece of the puzzle that they need.
Yeah, I mean, I felt if they were going to get a defenseman, it would just actually be a depth defenseman, like a number 7 guy. If Yzerman was still running it, I wonder if he would try to convince like a guy like Nicholas Cronwell to, who is playing on one leg, but is actually, for if you were looking for a guy to play 10 or 11 minutes, he can still deliver a big hit. He still can play on the power play. He's smart enough to realize not to take chances on his the way he played. He's hung on better than I think people thought he would. It looked like he was done 2 or 3 years ago, and he's been credible. But now I don't know. There's with Yzerman not making the decisions. I don't know, what the direction they'll go. But I do think defense is where they'll go. But I don't think it will be a big time guy. I think it'll be a depth guy.
Okay.
I agree with Kevin, only simply because after watching them the other night and you look at the amount of goals that they haven't given up this year, their defense is probably better than we've all made it out to be for most of the year. They seem to be hitting their stride. So they may just need a depth guy. Like, that's it.
Well, I mean, there's no great crying need right now. I mean, they're the best team in the league by leaps and bounds right now. So, I mean, they're under no pressure to make any kind of big move, unlike other teams in their division like Boston and Toronto. I think they have to address certain needs to have a chance to maybe beat Tampa in the playoffs. Just going to the other side of that.
Let me just throw something out there, because I really liked what you just said there about they're under no pressure. Is that true, or are they so good now? And everybody's talking about how good they look. I mean, are they under the pressure now? Like they've got to take this team and do something with it. I mean, do you think they're feeling that? Like, I wonder. Like, I think they will feel a little bit of pressure, because everybody knows, like, if you can't win with this team, when are you going to win?
Well, yeah, they fell short in the cup final against Chicago. They got to Game 7 against the Caps. So yeah, there is pressure there to get over the hump, so to speak. And you can look at it this way: they have Braden Point on an entry-level deal, making less than $700,000 this year, and he's probably going to be, I would say conservatively $8 million a year, which probably means they're going to have to move somebody else out to create some space. So there is that pressure. But I just look at how good they are, Kev, and I just think that right now the only team I think that can beat them could be, would either be Pittsburgh or Washington, based on their experience and the talent that they have. I don't know whether Boston or Toronto can beat them.
I mean, we all know that anything can happen in a 7-game series, but I would agree that particularly Washington, they certainly have the knowledge of how to do it and how to get it done, and they have pieces that are hard to deal with. Like, if Kuznetsov plays as well as he did in last year's playoffs, and they've got Ovechkin going, I mean, that'll be a great series if it gets to that.
You know what else, though, Kev? Tampa has so many assets to burn. They have such a great farm system that if they're in competition for a player with Boston, they may just get that player to keep him away from there.
I know that could be. I like Pittsburgh, and I like what they've done, and Schultz coming back helps and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. Doesn't it feel like they don't have the depth necessary to handle Tampa? To me, it feels like Washington is the team that has the best shot at taking down. And I'm not discounting Toronto as well. Like, Anderson comes back, he's had a strong season. They got to make a deal for defenseman, but I think they will. I think
get ready to drink. Get ready to drink, Russ, because but we have a drinking game here.
Honestly, I'm going to tell you, my gut feeling is it wouldn't shock me if Anderson heads back on the IR at some point, because I could see Babcock overusing him when he comes back and him heading right back there. Well, it all depends on Anderson, though. It does.
And I have to give kudos to Russ, because he wrote something last week, and Pierre LeBrun wrote something today about and we talked about it last time you were on, Kevin, about maybe a change in philosophy of certain coaches regarding their goaltenders. I really think Mike Babcock has to embrace this, because he's got a goaltender who, before he was in Toronto, there was a lot of question about Frederik Andersen's ability to stay healthy. And in Toronto, he's played through a lot. He played 66 games 2 years in a row, played every minute of every playoff game. I think he got pulled out of one of them, and McElhinney came in. But he's been a workhorse for the Leafs, but there was criticism last year about him being basically tuckered out in the first round against the Bruins, and he looked it in a couple of the games. And they really, if you don't have confidence in Garrett Sparks as your backup, then you go out and get a veteran like Michael Hutchinson and play him a little more. But I think you have to play, especially for guys who there are questions about, you have to play your backup more and have your goaltender ready for the playoffs. And they can do whatever they want in the regular season. They need to win in the playoffs. That's what they need to win. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. I think it's not. I don't think it's a fourth line guy. I think it's a top 9 forward.
The Leafs are going to get a top 4 defenseman. I
just don't see it not happening.
Yeah, I don't either. I wouldn't even worry about it. And there are enough guys out there that they'll get someone. I mean, I don't know who it'll be, but when you're this close, you have to go for it. So.
Yeah, that's why I think Kevin, you brought up Nashville and Mike, you're talking about Freddie Anderson. We brought this up before. I think Nashville also has to be a little cautious with Pekka Rinne on the health front and the workload too, because they need him playing like he is right now in the playoffs. And he's got them to the final, but he gassed in the final and he gassed against Winnipeg last year. And he's, on pace for 60 games, which is right around where he is. And I don't think they want to get him too much higher than that. Yeah. And, I think they can work with Soros, but it's the same philosophy. It applies to a few teams.
Yeah. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we were talking about Detroit. We were talking about Howard. But honestly, I really think Ken Holland has the opportunity here to make some major upgrades in terms of adding draft picks, getting prospects, because if you look at what potentially is available, not only Howard but Gustav Nyquist, who's a UFA and having a pretty decent year, Thomas Vanek, who's been a journeyman, but if a team needs a top 6, top 9 winger to stand in front of the net in the power play, I think Vanek can still do a decent job. Kronwall, as you mentioned, Kevin, and Nick Jensen. I mean, I think they can probably get themselves a first round pick and some, second and third round picks or prospects. I mean, that at this point where the Wings are, I think that's what they need to do.
Yeah, no, one thing I think they would do if someone would offer them a quality goaltending prospect, I think they'd be more inclined to, because they don't really have that guy in their system, and they've got a lot of younger players that they now are excited to buy.
Right.
But they need the young goaltender to kind of go with it. But, it's a sort of a dangerous game too, because everybody in Detroit is saying, okay, send them out and then try to re-sign them, because they're going to need a guy next year. Like they're ready to try next year to think, okay, now we're making progress. This is the year we had all the young kids, but they got to have a goalie. And, what's available out there, Bobrovsky's going to be out there. And Jimmy Howard, and depending on who needs a goalie, like they could be left with no veteran goalie or not one they like. So I think they're torn a little bit. I mean, I think they'd like to sort of keep Howard, but I also agree with you that if they could get someone back that's really attractive, I think they'd do it.
Well, and Varlamov is out there too, but I'm not sure if he's going to stay in Colorado or not. And to that point though, if you're talking about prospect, and Calgary makes a ton of sense because they actually have 2 really good young goalie prospects, and John Gillies and Tyler Parsons, who won the gold for the World Junior for Team USA a couple years ago. So that might be, they have a couple, so they might be willing to trade one of them, and both of them are relatively. Well, I mean, Parsons, I think he's only 20 or 21 years old, so that might be the way that they go. The other team is, and I keep hearing differing opinions about what they're going to do, is the New York Rangers, and Russ had to drop off because he had another radio thing to do. But there's been a lot of talk about Zuccarello recently, but also Kevin Hayes.
Kevin Hayes is a big one. Kevin Hayes is, I think, going to be one of the maybe the premium guy that everybody wants.
Yeah, I mean, Peter. I mean, we've heard the connection of Kevin Hayes to Colorado. We've heard the connection of Kevin Hayes to Winnipeg.
Winnipeg, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I think the only thing that, and I said Colorado is going to be one of the more interesting teams at this deadline. They're struggling a little bit right now, but they have the benefit of having Ottawa's a first-round pick, which means gives them the freedom to trade their own first-round pick, and their own first-round pick will probably be in the 20s. But it gives them the freedom now.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, like, I saw the Jets play Colorado the other night, and what was a rather bizarre game where you had 3 3-goal leads, and 2 of them disappeared. They won 7-4, but with over 4 minutes left in the game, Colorado pulled Grubauer, and McKinnon and Rantanen, they went to work. I mean, it was unbelievable to watch. They just don't stop. I mean, I don't know like what is giving them that fuel, but it's unbelievable. Bottle it and sell it. And they're a very dangerous team. I mean, I think they need a little more depth in their bottom forwards, but I think their Achilles heel is goaltending. Grubauer was awful. And Varlamov got 5 on him last night in Calgary, and yet they put up a ton of shots on Calgary and the Jets. They absolutely they peppered Hellebuck all night long. I'm curious if Sakic has the faith in those guys, and would they want to get someone in that could give them assurance? And it's an interesting question. It could be a very interesting thing with that extra second-round pick. I mean, and then I mean, I joked about this on Twitter, but I mean, with Ottawa, anything's possible. Maybe Sakic trades for Mark Stone to keep the plus more so they keep their first-round pick. I mean, because they have the room to sign him if they want to.
I've heard that. I've heard that that is the dream of all dream scenarios. Could you foresee any way, even if they got Mark Stone in a deal from Ottawa, that they would trade back what's almost guaranteed to be a top 5 pick in the next draft?
I don't.
Yeah, I don't. But you know what? I wouldn't.
It's nice to dream. It really is nice to dream.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you give up a late first-round pick to get a guy like Stone. I don't think you give up a top 5 pick.
Right. And if you look at Colorado,
not without term.
Yeah. If you look at Colorado, and I like their team and I like where they're going, but right now they've loaded up for the first half of the year with McKinnon, Landeskog, and Rantanen on one line. They don't have a ton of scoring depth. Guys like Soderberg and Alex Kerfoot. They have some talent there, but nothing that's really consistent. Their defense is a lot better than it has been in the past. But they really rely on their goaltending to keep them in games when their scoring is not there. I don't know what's the greater need, another goalie or secondary offense. To me, I think it's probably secondary offense. So if they could get a Stone or if they could get somebody like that, then I think that's probably the way they should go. But going back to the Rangers, though, just the talk has been about Zuccarello, and I know that Russ has said Zuccarello might be one of those guys where he gets traded and he goes back to the Rangers because he loves it there and they like him, but it will all be a question of how much they would re-sign him for. But Kevin, do you think we're gonna see more of that? Players, just going someplace for a couple months and then coming back, or is that just like very select for certain situations?
Yeah, well, I think it is select, but I do think that the environment of the NHL is more conducive to that. In the old days, I mean, obviously, when you have a chance to be an unrestricted free agent, your goal is to go to a team that gives you an opportunity to win and allow you an opportunity to be a big part of it. The problem that we're having in this era where there's so much parity is it's difficult to figure out where to go. Because it's not like the old days when there were only 4 teams that had a real good shot. There are a lot of teams that have a shot. So that's been replaced by now, if you look around, and even the John Tavares situation represents that. Guys are going where they just feel like they want to play because it's too hard to guess where, who's going to win. And because of that, I think you will have players that simply will go and try to win somewhere and then come back and play. I mean, in Detroit here where I live, Thomas Vanek loved playing in Detroit. Didn't really want to leave, but figured, well, I'll allow myself to be traded to Florida, and then hopefully I can re-sign there. And he really wanted to come back this summer, and the same will be true. Like, the Red Wing management like him. They consider him kind of an assistant coach player because he's so good with younger players, and he's a guy that's very coachable and fits in well. So, would they trade him again and bring him back? Yeah, it's a possibility.
Kevin, I have never seen a team with worse luck this year than the Arizona Coyotes.
Yeah.
Not only their number one goaltender is out for the year, now the guy that they trade a couple of their top prospects, Dylan Strome and Brendan Perlini, Nick Schmaltz, who they got in that deal, he is out for the year. And if you look at them, you would think, okay, they're going to be sellers because they're behind in the race for a playoff spot. But if you look at their roster, who are they selling?
Yeah, no, there's nobody there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's and I mean I don't envy John Chaika in his situation because the only guys that he could potentially sell, I know that Russ a couple days ago said something like Alex Goligoski, but he's under contract for a couple more years. If you want to move somebody out with term, I get that, but I think the veterans that are there you probably want to keep because it's tough to get veterans to come there, at least in free agency. It's almost like he's going to probably stand pat or just make like sort of tinkering moves because there's nobody who I think they really desperately want to move or think they can get a ton for in a trade.
Yeah, I don't see them doing much at all. And I do think, they'll be looking around to see what prospects. I mean, you look at Chaika and he's made a lot of moves of minor league guys. And I think that's, he's trying to catch lightning in a bottle. I think they're looking at, and that's what you got to do when you have a non-cap team. You got to find players that other teams are undervaluing. So I think that's what they'll do. I think they'll look around and you'll see some of their them trading for prospects, but I don't expect they'll be very busy.
Yeah. one thing that came up, Peter, to my mind, the Blues should be a seller, and we've heard the names Parayko, Pietrangelo, Tarasenko. Russ doesn't think that there's any chance that they trade Tarasenko, and I'm like, I think they would if they get what they consider equal value for him. I mean, it's tough to get a guy who's a 40 goal to equal value for a guy who's a consistent 35 to 40 goal scorer. But if they get low ball, then they're not going to move him. But then I saw something today that says, well, the Blues are they may not consider themselves sellers. I'm like, okay, if they don't consider themselves sellers now, when the hell would they ever consider themselves sellers?
Yeah, and I guess the what begs the question with the Blues is what are they trying to do, and how much do they what do they need to sell, how much do they need to change the organization? I just don't know if you're going to get, and we've talked about this a number of times, if you're going to get fair value for Tarasenko at this point in time. Like, I think that's a better move to, if you're really upsetting the apple cart in St. Louis and going to do some significant changes, doing it in the off season is probably a better solution. But, goofy things happen. GMs want to pay and get that chance. They believe in their opportunity and what happens in front. And sometimes things can happen. It's not impossible. It's just unlikely, but they should be listening. You should always be listening.
Yeah, and they will, but I agree with Peter. Like, the type of players they would want back for Tarasenko, contending teams can't give up. So that, this deal isn't going to happen now. I mean, as Peter said, this is sports, so anything is possible. Yeah. But, you make this deal in June. You don't make this kind of deal and, at the trade deadline. I don't even think that's even a remote possibility, to be honest.
And when you look at the prices of wingers and where they're going to go this summer with Rantanen, with Marner, with Stone as a UFA if he leaves Ottawa, you're talking probably $9 million or $8 to $9 million or over for all of those guys. Tarasenko is locked up for another 4 years at $7.5 million, and if he return, even if they trade him, he's likely going to return to the level of offense that he provides in the next few years. So I mean, his contract is a good value. Now, where I think the Blues, and I don't think they're going to trade Tarasenko. I think there's an outside chance they trade either Parayko or Pietrangelo, depending on whether they can afford Pietrangelo or want to pay him big money because he's a UFA after next year, or whether they still are believers in Parayko. He's got 3 years left at 5.5. But maybe Braden Shen, and there's been some talk about Braden Shen and the Boston Bruins, Kevin.
In that too.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I've liked Braden Shen for a while, but he's, as Russ has said, speed is not really a big part of his game. He's more of a guy who can stand in front of the net and really do well on a power play. I know that the Bruins are looking for a number 3 center or maybe a second line winger to replace what they lost in Rick Nash last year. So I think that Shen could fit either one of those roles. But again, it's a question of, what they can get back from the Bruins or any other team for a guy who I think for them has been less impactful than they thought he was going to be.
Yeah, I mean, it worked out well initially, the Braden Shen trade. It looked like that they had gotten exactly what they want, and but he just hasn't been able to sustain that level of play that he had in the first season. But the one thing about the Blues, like a lot of this trade rumor talk that's happened regarding the Blues resulted from the Armstrongs was saying that pretty much everybody was available, and I really took that as his way of saying, I'm just so unhappy with this team's overall performance more than hey, I'm open for business. Like, right. I think it's possible they may, trade Braden Shen, and, if they found the right fit. He has 1 year left on his deal. His contract is just over $5 million. It's doable. Right. But, for the most part, I think most of the players you've mentioned, those are the kind of players that need to get traded in the offseason. Like, if you're trading a guy like Pietrangelo, you want so much in return that, that doesn't help a contending team. Like, a contending team is always looking to add a guy where they can give up a young player or a prospect. You're not trading Pietrangelo for a young player and, or a prospect. You want a real value trade on that. So I think the Blues won't do as much as people thinking they're going to do. They may do a lot this summer, but I just don't see at the trade deadline they're going to be the factor. And the other thing is it's easier to take money in the summer as well. And that's a big deal during the season where you're trying to add players, especially premium players that have big price tags.
Yeah, Patrick Maroon's another guy who they signed on a 1 year deal. Who, I mean, Peter, for those teams that are looking for a sort of a rough and tumble guy who can play up and down the lineup. I mean, he proved he could play with McDavid, and that was in Edmonton. And maybe he can handle a lesser role some other places. Yeah. But for teams that need a little sandpaper, that might be a guy who they could add.
Yeah, I think so. I don't disagree with that at all, Mike.
I've got a question for Peter, and it's completely selfish because I have him on my fantasy team. I certainly have watched Kyle Connor this season with interest, and it's amazing to me. Is there another sport where who you play with on the line is just so important, and playing time and everything. And when I watched the Oilers get hurt, I thought, oh, my guy's going to go back to that top line and he's going to score more. Is that going to happen? Did you think?
I think so. He scored last game, and that was his first goal, I think, in 10 games.
Yeah.
Maurice has been alternating Ehlers and Connor on the top two lines because they both play the left wing. Even though Ehlers is a left shot, he played junior on his off wing. He up and down depending on situation. I think, it was one of those situations with Connor that he, I think teams are reading him a little better. It's that thing where he came out flying pretty hot. He had a bit, people knew he was a good goal scorer from last year, and then he kind of quieted down for a bit, and teams were kind of isolating on him. They were sort of figuring things out. But the team as a whole hasn't played very well in its last 15 games or so. And I think, Connor's either a symptom of that or he's the result of it. Like his play is the result of it. So I think given some things that are going on with the roster right now and some of the challenges Maurice is facing with depth, he's going to get a little more creative because he's got to also find a way to get Patrick Laine going. And that's going to mean some more moves, at least roster wise, and looking for chemistry. And given that he is absolutely 100% not willing to break up Scheifele and Wheeler, I think Connor's going to find himself used in different areas a bit now and probably getting a little more ice time. So I would expect his production to go up.
Don't you support Maurice on the Scheifele and Wheeler connection?
I do because I do because they drive play, and you need and considering when you look at like a McKinnon and Rantanen, and then you look at Gaudreau and who plays with Gaudreau? Is it Lindholm? What? Monahan, yeah. And you look at some of these teams in the West who they've had to play against, it's hard to not break them up. I think the problem that everyone's seeing with the Jets is it doesn't matter who you're putting with Brian Little right now, is that play is not moving there. Like things are not, Little isn't moving the puck around in the same way that he used to. And he's in the first year of his 6-year extension. So there's a little concern there. I think there's some tactical things that can solve that, but I think things will improve, but Maurice has to be open to tactical changes, Kevin.
It's funny, Peter, because what you're talking about in terms of chemistry and playing around with the lines is there's always these comparatives when it comes to Winnipeg and Toronto. Babcock is moving around his lines today, shifted his power play. He's taken Austin Matthews off the number 1 power play, and there was a lot of criticism about putting the top 3 centers on the first power play. And I almost got the impression that he was waiting for that unit to fail so he could move either Matthews or Kadri down to the second power play, and he did that in practice, and it's going to happen against New Jersey tonight. But the William Nylander thing, he's just continued to struggle, and now they're shifting their line combinations every game. Today, it's going to be Nylander on the third line, then they'll move him up to play with Matthews. I mean, they're trying to do anything right now to get him jump started, and it took 12 or 13 games, but Babcock is starting, the level of frustration is starting to rise, and you can see the comments of, he's got to buy in, he's got to get going, he's got to do this. The patience is worn off. Now he's starting to put the cattle prod to him. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out if he continues to struggle. And also, he's making over $10 million this year because of the contract impasse.
And Mike Babcock's cattle prod has a lot of volts.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like, Paul Maurice, one of the famous things he said when he was first in Winnipeg was, he goes, I can make you cry if I want to. I can only imagine what Mike Babcock can do to someone.
And Kevin, it's not limited to the players, because he's already started. It's a little over a month before the deadline, and he's already started to prod about, well, we need heavier players, or we need, our team is not playing heavy, and he's sort of sending subtle messages to Kyle Dubas to get me some heavier players. So.
Yeah, no, I know Mike. Well, that's why he's successful.
Absolutely.
People can say what they want about him, but his teams always perform. He always gets the most out of his team, and his methods, while not always loved by players, are effective in this modern era. Is there anyone tougher than Mike Babcock? It's hard in the modern era to be tough, but he is. So.
Yeah. Well, great show, guys. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast. For the departed Russ Cohen, for Kevin Allen, for Peter Tessier, I'm Michael Agello. Thanks for watching, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.